Hi everyone. So with Warhawk, crazy Warhawk, John Bolton, recently appointed as National Security Advisor to Trump, I think it's a safe bet to say either the Iranian nuclear deal is going to be cancelled within the next 6 months, or tensions with Iran are going to escalate and maybe lead to war, or all of the above. So with that in mind, I think it's a really good idea to try and get as many people as possible to understand the history between Iran and America, because once you understand the history, you can then make an informed decision, and you're not going to get an informed decision by watching Rachel Maddow, unfortunately. So to understand it all, we need to go back to 1953. Now, 1953 was the year that the United Kingdom, along with the United States, overthrew the first ever democratically elected leader of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and reinstalled Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who you probably know as the Shah, which is a Persian word for Iranian king. Mossadegh, who was appointed 2 years earlier and Iran's first ever elected official, had realised Iran's vast wealth from the nation's oil reserves were being pillaged by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, or AIOC for short, which was a British corporation and is now part of BP. The newly elected leader understood that for the previous 50 years, most of the profits from Iran's petroleum industry had been leaving the country instead of being used to build it. Mossadegh, who'd won the Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1951, and in a move which the Iranian people loved and overwhelmingly supported, wanted to audit the AIOC's documents and limit their control over Iranian petroleum reserves. When they refused to cooperate with the Iranian government, the parliament voted to nationalise Iran's oil industry and to remove any foreign dignitaries from the country. While this move cemented Mossadegh's overwhelming popularity at home in Iran, the United Kingdom, who would lose significant amounts of revenue from the decision, didn't like it at all. They took Iran to the World Court for a ruling, but lost the case, so instead they blockaded the Gulf of Iran in an attempt to halt any trade between Iran and any other country, and then asked US President Truman to help with a regime change. Truman actually refused. However, when Dwight Eisenhower won the 1952 election in a landslide in which he carried 39 of the 50 states, he was convinced by UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill that Mossadegh was propped up by the Iranian Communist Party. Now, that wasn't true, of course. The Iranian Communist Party was small at the time. However, the communist threat angle played really well with the Eisenhower administration, as it included the now infamous anti-communist voices of Joseph McCarthy and the Dulles brothers. The Dulles brothers, who were head of the CIA and Secretary of State, then pushed for action, and Eisenhower promised to help the UK with a coup, instructing CIA Director Alan Dulles to get rid of what Dulles went on to call the madman Mossadegh. The CIA, which was formed in the years following World War II and was still in its infancy, was sent to Iran to instigate the coup, and the code name it was given, the whole plan, was codenamed Operation Ajax. The CIA bought the support of Iranian journalists, politicians, military officers, and even paid for the services of the extremist organisation the Warriors of Islam, who were a well-known terrorist group. Organised mobs then caused chaos in the Iranian capital city Tehran in August of '53 by spreading rumours that Mossadegh was a Jewish communist, and the CIA, along with British intelligence help, paid street gangs to destroy mosques and cause unrest. Mossadegh and thousands of his most ardent supporters were arrested for treason, and many of them were executed. Mossadegh went to prison for 3 years before being released in 1956 and put under house arrest until his death in 1967. So the first ever truly democratically elected government of Iran was overthrown, and the Shah returned to power. The Iranian oil reserves once again came under the control of the UK, along with America, the Netherlands and France, and Iranian oil once again flowed westward. For 25 years, the Shah ruled with an iron fist and became the United States' closest ally in the Middle East. The United States had cut into the British share of the petroleum spoils as 5 US companies, Standard, Mobilgas, Chevron, Texaco and Gulf, claimed 40% ownership of a new Iranian oil consortium. The Western media, of course, portrayed the whole operation to be a great success, but in reality, the United States had just made a huge mistake, one that would lead to enormous repercussions for the next 3/4 of a century, repercussions that we're still seeing right now. At the time of the coup, Iran shared a 1,250-mile border with the former Soviet Union, and the Soviets now saw the United States installing a puppet government with a neighbour as a great threat, which had a huge hand in increasing tensions in the Cold War. Operation Ajax was felt worse by the Iranian citizens themselves there, who were outraged that their country, which had begun to thrive under the democratically elected Mossadegh, was now back to where they were in the decades before. Once again, they were ruled by a brutal dictator, with dissidents tortured by the Shah's secret police, the Savak, and the citizens oppressed. The Shah eliminated all political opposition, and troops were sent to massacre demonstrators. While the Shah did install some of the positive Western ideals in Iran, such as allowing women to vote, he installed many of the bad ones too. The Shah ultimately only serviced the elite, and the economic wealth gap increased massively between the masses and the people at the top. It took 25 years for the Iranian people to fight back and retake control over their country. 1979 was the year of the Islamic Revolution, which was led by Ayatollah Khomeini, who was one of the rioters in 1953, but became one of the Shah's most outspoken critics and was imprisoned for his dissidence for 18 months. Khomeini, following his release from prison in 1963 and from his exile abroad, inspired the people to rise up and revolt, leading to the Shah being forced out of power. Shortly after 2 million people had flooded a public square in Tehran, which had led to the Shah exiling, he was given refuge in America by then President Carter. Infuriated by the US's actions once again, a gang of Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran amid fears the CIA was about to instigate another coup, just as they had done from the very same embassy 26 years earlier. They were correct in their fears, as the now President Carter had sent a NATO general to Iran to instigate another coup, but this time it failed. The students held 52 hostages at the embassy for over 14 months, demanding 4 things from the US government. Return the Shah to Iran for trial in accordance with the US-Iran extradition treaty. Return Shah's blood money to the Iranian people. Promise never to interfere with Iran's affairs again, and admit guilt and apologise. None of these demands were met, but it effectively destroyed Carter's once promising presidency. It wasn't until the year 2000 that the United States even recognised their involvement in the coup, when Secretary of State Madeleine Albright admitted the CIA's actions. She never apologised there. Ayatollah Khomeini had installed a government under Islamic law in 1979. However, Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, and backed by the US government's money, satellite imagery, and intelligence, invaded Iran within a year and sought to take control of Iran's petroleum reserves and key shipping waterways. The US pressured Gulf states into giving Hussein billions in loans so he could buy weapons from Russia, China, and Western Europe, and issued licenses to export chemicals to Iraq so they could be weaponized and used against the Iranians in the war. These chemicals became known in the early 21st century as Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction program. The US continued to support Iraq throughout the war, with over half of their global arms sales going to Iraq during that period, even though Saddam Hussein used his newly acquired chemical weapons against both Iran and against any Kurdish rebels within his own country. The resulting Iran-Iraq war lasted 8 years from 1980 to 1988, and it was one of the bloodiest since World War II. At least 500,000 Iranians were killed, and resulted in even further resentment towards the United States and the West. What is probably most amazing about this whole sordid affair, though, is because of a fear they would destabilize the Middle East and become a threat to the American imperial empire if Iraq became too powerful or allied with a neighboring country, and with another perceived possible threat from the Soviet Union invading from the north, the United States also armed the other side in the war, Iran. This became better known as the Iran-Contra scandal, when in 1985 the now US President Reagan's government, who needed to finance their clandestine war in Nicaragua, began selling arms to Iran through Israel, with the proceeds going to the US-backed Nicaraguan right-wing rebel group, the Contras. Ayatollah Khomeini died shortly after the war ended in 1989 and will go down in history as a dictator, even though he promised democracy. Education and healthcare flourished in Iran under Khomeini's rule, however so did censorship, the attacking of women's civil rights, and the violent crushing of any political opponents. The brutal secret police, the Savak, were replaced by the equally barbaric Revolutionary Guard, and Iran became an oppressive regime under Khomeini, and has continued under the rule of his successor, Ayatollah Khomeini. Also, following the revolution in 1979, international cooperation with Iran's nuclear program by most Western governments was cut off. Iranian officials concluded that the country's nuclear development should continue in 1981, and agreements with France and Argentina in the 80s and early 90s were reached, and in the 1990s, Russia formed a joint nuclear research organization with Iran. In the 2000s, with a heightened state of war throughout the West following the 9/11 attacks in America, the revelation of Iran's secret uranium enrichment program raised concerns that it might be intended for non-peaceful use, and in 2006, the United Nations Security Council demanded that Iran suspend its enrichment programs. They didn't. Iran's continued interest in nuclear technology and development of an extensive nuclear fuel cycle, including sophisticated enrichment capabilities, became the subject of intense international negotiations and sanctions between 2002 and 2015. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA for short, a comprehensive 25-year nuclear agreement limiting Iran's nuclear capacity, was finally negotiated in 2015 and brought an end to Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. And on the 16th of January 2016, all nuclear-related sanctions on Iran were lifted as they had met all key metrics of the deal. Right now, however, with Trump in the White House and a staff full of neocons who have never met a war they didn't like the sound of, the Iran nuclear agreement looks more and more uncertain. And this is where we are right now. Neither side in this fight can say they are innocent. Neither Iran or America should shoulder all of the blame. However, much like when two school children are taken to the headmaster's office for fighting, we should always know who threw the first punch. And in this case, it was definitely the United States which landed the first blow, when they overthrew a legally and democratically elected leader to keep oil flowing in a westward direction, along with any profits that go with it. What is most annoying about all of this, at least for me, is not the amount of mistakes that have happened in the last 75 years, or that it seems no concerted effort has been made to make peace with Iran. It's that the media in America refuse to tell the American people the facts about the whole affair. They only tell this story as if it started with President Obama brokering a nuclear peace deal in 2016, and that Trump could break any promises made, when the truth is this whole problem began when Trump was a toddler. Because if the American people knew this whole story, the vast majority would surely want peace more than they already overwhelmingly do. But maybe that's the reason why the corporate media act the way they do, only giving the public a limited amount of information at any one time and missing out huge facts in their reporting. Maybe they're in on the gig. Maybe there's a reason so many journalists and reporters have been exposed in the past as being CIA agents, or why some current high-profile cable news anchors had originally interned at intelligence agencies. And maybe this is why in the Democratic midterm primaries in 2018, a quarter of all the candidates they are running come from intelligence, State Department, or national security backgrounds. Maybe that's been the plan all along, to have both sides of the government and the entire corporate media, both cable and print, in the pocket of the deep state, so no matter who the public vote for, the war machine trundles on regardless, in their endless mission of global domination. And this is why it's so important we support independent media in such a worrying time in our history. The establishment is actively trying to silence their voices, and voices like mine, who stick to the truth and report on the full facts when it comes to world events. They are pressuring social media platforms to stop our voices being heard through a changing of complex algorithms which make the truth more and more difficult to find, and by way of demonetization of anything that does not echo the establishment narrative. These are worrying times we live in. The decisions being made in Washington right now not only have consequences for your children and future generations, but for mankind itself. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you've learned a few things. I know I did by doing a lot of research for this video, and I'm so glad I did it, even though it took me 2 or 3 days to compile it all. I hope you enjoy it. If you did, please like, subscribe, click the bell for a notification of any future videos I drop, and please support independent media. If you can't do it with a few dollars each month, don't worry, just share independent media videos and articles like this one that give you the truth and the facts as wide as possible, because the more people that understand the truth, the more informed a decision they can make on which person should be running the country. So thanks very much. Until next time, peace and take care.